Greetings everyone, and welcome back to the third and probably last faction focus I will do. I might do one on some of the new factions coming out next week, but for now, of the old ones, this is the last one, and we're covering my favorite faction, and probably gonna be my main faction for 10th edition, the Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000, the Emperor's Chosen, the Golden Bananas, the Janitors, the Pillarmen, there's a lot of names for them. They're cool, they're really nice, and let me just spoil it right away, their faction focus is pretty damn good as well. Very excited about this, super into what they're doing. I'll just get started, I suppose. So, the Golden Legion, the 10,000, they are the bodyguards of the Emperor and the original Space Marines, so to say, and no, we don't count Thunder Warriors. I'm not 100% up to date on the lore and how they are, presented, but from what I've gathered, this is actually what the Emperor wanted to do. He wanted a legion of Custodes, or like an army of Custodes, but each of them takes so damn long to craft because they have to be so goddamn perfect, and so many people who go through the process of becoming a Custodes just fucking dies. It wasn't really possible if you want to conquer the galaxy or the universe to have the Custodes as the main force, and so he resorted to creating the Space Marines instead afterwards. Again, not 100% sure that's correct, but for sure, the Emperor's favored sons, or creations, are the Custodes. And yes, I'm gonna piss off some Space Marine fans, but I don't care, because Custodes are cooler. Anyways, for the overview of the faction rules, the army rule are Martial Katah. Now, this is something that was introduced in the 9th edition codex. Don't believe it existed in 8th edition. And some people liked it, some people didn't like it. I was kind of in the middle. I thought it was fine. It was a bit weird that the Golden Warriors special thing was karate, but, it's fine. The issue I had with 9th edition Custodes Katah was that you very much needed to predict what you wanted to do throughout the entire game from the very start, because you had to choose them after deployment. And yes, Trajann could rearrange them and stuff like that, but you have 6 to choose from, but honestly only like 4 or 5 were ever used. You had the advance and do actions, you had the advance and shoot, you had the 6s against monsters, auto wound, and then you had the cannot fall back in melee, and those 4 were kind of like the main ones, and then all the others were just like, sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. But now, Martial Katah is something that is very flexible and also quite powerful. So, at the start of the fight phase, this means both your fight phase, but also the opponent's fight phase, you can select one Katah stance from the list below to be active for your army until the end of the phase. While a Katah stance is active for your army, each unit from your army with this ability gains the relevant ability. The way they word this is a bit weird, because when we look at the datasheets later on, there isn't a Martial Katah keyword, so I'm a bit unsure if Dreadnoughts are gonna get this. In 9th edition, Dreadnoughts didn't get this, but now they might do. We'll have to wait and see on that. But we have the Captaris stance. This was the you cannot fall back unless you beat me in a roll-off in 9th edition, but now it's simply -1 to hit. So your guys are in melee, you're in Captaris stance, and then the opponent is hitting on 4s instead of 3s, or 5s instead of 4s, etc, etc. Very powerful defensive buff, and because you can pop it in your opponent's fight phase, this gives you the option of being in a, defensive mode if you're not sure you can handle the attacks coming in, or you want to minimize the amount of damage you take. Super powerful. I think people kind of sleep on how good -1 to hit actually is. But that's really good, really strong, very, very good. The next one is the Dagatari one, which before was +1 attack on your models, but you went down to damage 1. Instead now it is sustained hits 1, which is the same as exploding 6s. Or no, actually, exploding 6s is wrong. Critical hits generate an additional hit. Because we might have something with forced to hit counts as a critical hit, whatever. But yeah, this just increases the output of Custodes, which is absolutely amazing, because that is the biggest struggle of Custodes. Custodes are a melee army, but they're not an amazing melee army. They're a very good melee army, but if I would say an amazing melee army, I would say World Eaters. Because World Eaters have the number of attacks as well as good profiles to the point where wherever you put into melee, you can probably depend on your units doing what you expect them to do. With Custodes, you had the profile to do what you wanted to do, but you didn't have the output because each guy only had 3 attacks. And so quite often, 3 guys with 3 attacks, that's 9 attacks total. I mean, yes, they have the profile to kill Marines, but if you just got a little bit unlucky or your opponent got lucky on the saving throw, then you just didn't wipe them because you didn't have the number of attacks. And the Dagatari stance helps with that immensely because just generating 1 or 2 more attacks with the profiles of the Custodes really can make the difference between killing the entire unit or leaving 1 or 2 models. And then finally, we have the Rendak stance. These give you lethal hits, which are critical hits, auto wound. This is of course going to be amazing when you're punching into, say, a bunch of Imperial Guard tanks or a Land Raider or whatever it may be, because the increase in toughness of vehicles have meant that a lot of Custodes have gone down in power just a little bit when it comes to fighting those vehicles. We'll see later on that, for example, the Guardian Spear is still strength 7, which is also is in 9th edition, but strength 7 in 9th edition meant you'd wound a lot of normal vehicles on 4s, but now you're wounding those on 5s instead. So being able to bypass having to roll the wound roll is also very, very good. Overall, when I first saw the Martial Katah, I was like, it's a little bit of a boring army rule, but it's also so flexible and it's something you can always use in any matchup because you always want to be in melee, you always want to be, tankier with Captaris, and having the option of being either more attacks or attacks can skip the wound roll is just, again, so amazing to have on demand. If this was like the old system where I had to choose, the order of these, I'd say this was a bad army rule, but since you can change them each and every fight phase, it's very flexible, very strong, really like this. Moving on to the detachment rule, we have the Aegis of the Emperor. This one is super boring, but unfortunately probably kinda needed. It's a 4-up feel no pain against mortal wounds. This was part of the Emperor's Chosen sub-faction bonuses, alongside the 1-hit reroll or 1 wound reroll. And the reason why I took this was because there was so many mortal wounds in the game. However, Emperor's Chosen was also the most vanilla and the most boring sub-faction of all the Custodes sub-factions, but it was also like the most versatile because you always needed protection against mortal wounds because Custodes have so few bodies that if you get hit by mortal wounds and you only have the normal 6-up feel no pain against them, you kinda just die. So having the feel no pain ability against mortals was just so needed, and then having 1 reroll on everything was just also really good. So yeah, disappointed that it's just a 4-up against mortal wounds for our detachment ability, but it's also really good. Which also scares me because that might mean that in the future, when we get new detachments for the Custodes, people will still just stick with this one because, again, we need the protection against mortal wounds. That being said, seems like mortal wounds are, well, at least like psychic phase mortal wounds are not gone, but heavily nerfed. So maybe it's not as bad as before. We'll have to wait and see. Then moving on to our faction leader, we have Trajann Valoris. He is movement 6, toughness 6, which means he's gone up by 1 toughness. He shares the same toughness as the normal infantry of Custodes, so I think it's fair to predict that all of the infantry will be going to toughness 6. He has a 2-up save, 7 wounds, which means he's lost a wound, but he's also a leader now, which means he can be inside of a unit. So overall, he's actually gotten more tanky. Then he's leadership 5, and I was a bit surprised by this, but he's only objective control 2. Which I'm a bit skeptical about this. Also moving on to our Terminators, which is the next data sheet. They are also only objective control 2, which is more than, say, Space Marine Terminators. But it got me a little bit worried because, yeah, okay, Space Marine Terminators are only objective control 1, but 5 Space Marine Terminators is the same cost as like 2.5 Custodes Terminators. So I'm a bit like, we gotta get kind of screwed over here. What's gonna happen? But we'll have to wait and see for that. Now for his weapons, you might be noticing that the Misericordia is missing. I'll be talking about that in just a moment. But the ranged weapon of the Watcher's Axe is now an assault weapon. It used to be rapid fire. It's still 24-inch range. It's gone for 2 attacks now. Before it was rapid fire 1. So they just changed rapid fire on basically all Custodes weapons, it looks like, into assault instead, which is really good because quite often you would advance your guys to get in position and then you just couldn't shoot, which you can now. So I think that's really good. It is ability skill 2, still, strength 5, same as before, AP 2, so it's gone up by 1 AP, and then it's damage 3. It's also gone up in damage by 1, and I was a little bit surprised by that, because, like, damage 3 shooting, I know it's only 2 shots, but, like, wow, okay, cool, I'll take it. Granted that strength 5, it was strength 5 before, but strength 5 in 10th edition is obviously a lot weaker than strength 5 in 9th edition. But yeah, overall, the Watcher's Axe has gotten a glow up. Cool to see. I'll take it. I'll take it. For melee, we have the Watcher's Axe again. This is 6 attacks, same as before. Weapon skill 2, same as before. Strength 10. It was strength times 2 before, and Custodes are strength 5, so same strength again as before. But because strength is worth less now, or not worth less, but the same strength in 9th edition is not worth as much in 10th edition, so a slight nerf, but strength 10 is still really good. AP 2, it was AP 3 before, so it's gone down by 1 AP, we've seen that for a lot of profiles. And then there's damage 3, so that's also the exact same as before. So in terms of weapons, a buff on the ranged weapon, and then a slight nerf on the melee weapon, because it's still strength 10 like it was in 9th edition. Then for his abilities, he has Deep Strike. He didn't have this before, so that's pretty cool. I think the reason why they did this might be because you can join the Allarus as a leader. They don't say he can, and he also has more movement than those guys, but he might be able to join that unit as a leader, and therefore he needs to have the Deep Strike keyword. Then he has his Feel No Pain ability, same as before, a 5-up, very good. And then we move on to the Captain General ability. While this model is leading a unit, you can ignore any or all modifiers to the characteristics of models in that unit and or to any roll or test made for models in that unit. In a sense, that just means that you cannot negatively modify, because you can choose to ignore them, because it says you can ignore. So any negative modifiers you want to use to defend your units against the unit that Trajann is leading will just not work. -1 to hit? No. Or -1 to wound? No. Or subtract 2 strength? No. Any of those things will not work. However, you can still modify the saving throw, so if you're playing Thousand Suns and use the Cabal Ritual where you remove the option to take armor saving throws, that will still work. This is a fairly good ability. It just means that whatever unit that is bodyguarding Trajann Valoris will also always perform at their best, which is, you know, very, very like lore friendly, or not lore friendly, but it's like, oh shit, the Captain General is here. We always do perfect, but now we gotta do perfect extra. And then he has retained his Moment Shackle, which is a once per battle do one of 3 things, but the 3 things to choose from have changed a little bit. The first one is that the Watcher's Axe melee has an attack characteristic of 12 instead of 6. He kinda had this before because he could fight twice, but now instead of fighting twice, he just does 12 attacks when, you know, you choose to do it. The other one is that this model has a 2-up invulnerable save, and when I read this I was like, sorry, what? Because he's T6, 5-up Feel No Pain, and then potentially a 2-up invulnerable save. Now do keep in mind, to use this 2-up invulnerable save, you do need to allocate the wounds to Trajann and not the unit that he's leading. And I also don't think we have it confirmed yet if you can choose to allocate the wounds to the leader instead of the unit. It might be that you need to allocate the wounds to all the bodyguards first before you can start doing it to the leader. As I said, I'm not 100% sure we've been told about that. In any case, having a 2-up invulnerable save is... that's real good. And then the third choice you have is models in this unit have the Fight First ability. And that is very exciting because in 10th edition, the rules that have been leaked, we have seen that Fight First actually works the other way around than it did in 9th edition. In 9th edition, the player whose turn it was had priority on Fight First. And then the other player had priority on Fight Normal. But in 10th edition, the player whose turn it isn't actually has priority in Fight First. So that means that if the unit that Trajann is leading gets charged by something, you know, the charging unit, they have Fight First, but you then decide that I will use my Moment Shackle to gain Fight First on my unit, your unit gets to fight before the charging unit, even though it's your opponent's turn. And that is huge. That means you can probably like completely negate, potentially, say, a squad of Repentia charging into you. So that's super solid, and I think that's probably one of the abilities that people might not think about, because like, I get fight first, but they still get to choose first. No, you get to choose first, because at least from what we've seen for the rules that were leaked, that's how it works in 10th edition. Then finally, he has the 4-up invulnerable save, and that rounds out Trajann Valoris. Very solid. I wrote this in a few discords. For Trajann Valoris, I'd say he's gotten a slight glow up on certain things, and otherwise it's just been like side graded, which means that they just changed what was good into something else that is still good. So yeah, Trajann Valoris is at least, I want to say, as good as he was before, perhaps slightly better. Alright, that was Trajann Valoris. Moving on, we have the Allarus Custodians. I have a lot to say about this, and this will probably be where most of my time spent talking in this video will be, because I did a shit ton of math when I saw the profile on the Castellan Axe versus the Guardian Spear. We'll get to that in a moment. For now, we can see that the movement of the Allarus Custodians have been put down to 5 inches. It was 6 inches before. That was kind of like the special thing about Custodes Terminators. They had 1 wound more, and then they also had retained their 6-inch movement compared to Space Marine Terminators. They are now toughness 7, before they were simply toughness 5 like every other Custodes. But T7 on Allarus, whoa boy, Death Guard, crying in their little corner right now because our Terminators are more tough than their Terminators. Yeah, toughness 7 Custodes, I wasn't quite expecting that, not on infantry. They still have a 2-up save, still have 4 wounds, leadership 6, not leadership 5, that is for Trajann Valoris alone, which means they have the same leadership as Space Marines, where I'm kind of like, But then again, it's clear that they want Battle Shock to be a bigger focus in the game. And so I'm probably okay with only leaders having a 5-up leadership. But yeah, that's just my thoughts. Then they have an objective control of 2, which is better than Space Marine Terminators. But as I mentioned earlier when talking about Trajann, having an OC of 2 for Custodes is very scary, very scary. We'll have to wait and see if there's anything else to it. We already know that the Vexilla is not a character anymore, it's simply a war gear choice. And if you do give it that, you go up to 3 OC. So that helps, but then you also sacrifice a melee weapon on one of your Allarus. I'm not sure, we'll have to wait and see. I want to see what Custodian Guards have in objective control and like what their abilities are, because all the troops we've seen so far have had some kind of ability where they either get rerolls against something on an objective, or decrease the objective control of other enemy units on that objective, stuff like that. I'm thinking that we'll need to wait and see until the Custodian Guard datasheet comes out to make like a certain assumption about whether or not you need to bring the Vexilla. But yeah, the Allarus Custodians went down in movement, went up in toughness, otherwise they are mostly the same profile-wise. However, there's some changes to basically all their weapons. First of all, the Ballista's Grenade Launcher is now Blast. It was also Blast before, but it is 18-inch range, where I believe it was 15-inch range before. I might be mistaken on that one, but I could look it up because I have this site right here. Never mind, it was 18 inches before. However, it is now D6 attacks instead of D3. Still hits on 2s, it is strength 4, it used to be strength 5, it is also AP 1, it used to be AP 3, and then it is still damage 1. The grenade launcher was a bit of a weird one. It was D3 shots, it was blast, so it was meant to shoot into like hordes, but it was also AP 3 and then damage 1, so it was a weird profile. But now they've just said, alright, you get more shots, but you get it at a slightly worse profile, and they just said, they kind of just turned it into a completely horde clearing focused gun. So I'm fine with that. Then the Castellan Axe and the Guardian Spear has the exact same profile. They both used to be rapid fire before. Otherwise, nothing has changed, which means they've been nerfed slightly because they didn't go up in strength from 9th edition to 10th edition. But having the weapon change to be Assault is honestly quite a big buff for Custodes, because as I said, often you would advance the guys forward on the board. So yeah, I'd say it's either a side grade or a small upgrade. Now moving over into the melee weapons, we have the Castellan Axe, which is 4 attacks, same as before. Weapon skill 3, which means basically -1 to hit at strength 9, AP 1, it was AP 2 before, and then damage 3, it was damage 2 before. And when you first looked at this, you probably were like me and you got like really excited, like, yeah, Axes are the coolest on Terminators, they finally deal damage free, yeah! And then you realize some guy on Reddit did the math. That guy on Reddit was me. So I made this post on Warhammer Competitive where I talked about Allarus axes versus spears, and I did a bunch of math using unit crunch, and the short answer is that axes fucking suck. I might make a video just dedicated to talking about this topic, but there is like 1 or 2 very specific profiles in the game that we have seen so far where the axes would make sense to take over the spears, and the spears still perform really well into those targets, it's just like slightly behind. So if you are assembling your Allarus Custodians right now and you're wondering whether to put spears or axes on them, well, with what we know right now, which honestly, of course, is not a lot, spears are the way to go, like by far. It's not even close. Finally, we have the Misericordia, and, well, 07 in the chat, boys. Misericordia is gone, in the way that, well, you'll have it, but you will almost never want to use it. So the Misericordia is 5 attacks, weapon skill 2, strength 5, AP 2, damage 1, same profile as it is in 9th edition. But in 9th edition, it was an additional attack. However, now it is 5 attacks, but we already know now that you have to choose one of the melee weapons that you are carrying to do all your swings with. So if you are carrying the Castellan Axe, you might want to use the Misericordia if you're fighting, say, Termagants. But if you're carrying the Guardian Spear, there was never a reason to ever use the Misericordia. And then of course, if you have the Vexilla, you don't get a melee weapon, but you do get to take the Misericordia, and so you'll use it there. Then there's also units like the Sagittarium, which don't have a melee weapon, but they can take a Misericordia, so that's probably why they decided to do it, rather than say it's extra attacks, it's simply now just its own weapon. Still kind of sad, because, you know, it was always funny when you needed to deal one more wound to your opponent, and you're like, alright, the spears, the axes, they're done. However, Misericordia, time to shine. And you roll the dice, and then you roll a 1, and then you're like, fuck. But the chance of that happening was fun, and that's just gone now. It's, you know, it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. I'm sad to see it go, but it's fine. For their abilities, they have Deep Strike, same as before, and then they have Slayer of Tyrants. In 9th edition, Slayer of Tyrants was that you could pile in and consolidate towards a character instead of the closest target, as long as you ended in engagement range. That is completely changed now. Instead, each time a model in this unit makes an attack that targets the character, monster, or vehicle unit, you can reroll the wound roll. This is obviously really good, and it is also why the axe fucking sucks on Terminators. Because the only thing the axe has going for it is that it is strength 9, which makes it better punching into, say, a Rhino, or something that's toughness 8, but unfortunately, most of those things we've seen so far have all been a character, a monster, or a vehicle, which means you get to reroll the wound roll anyway. And when you get to reroll the wound roll, having one more attack at higher AP is actually worth so much more. Again, I might do a video talking about the math, but just trust me on this one, I've done the math, plenty of people have done the math, the axe just kind of sucks when you can just reroll the wound roll. Oh, and to be clear, it's also worse at killing Terminators. So even without the wound rerolls, because of the low AP and lower number of attacks and higher weapon skill, it's also worse at killing Terminators, which, I mean, it's supposed to be good at killing Terminators. It's kind of like a Terminator killing profile. Whatever, I'm fine. It's fine. Axes are the coolest weapon choice on the Terminators, but I'll just build mine with spears. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not mad. I'm a little mad. But yeah. Slayer of Tyrants, though, real good rule. Very nice. And then finally, they have their From a Golden Light They Come. That's not what it's called, but that was what it used to be called. Anyways, From Golden Light. Once per battle at the end of your opponent's turn, if this unit is not within engagement range of one or more enemy units, you can remove it from the battlefield in the reinforcement step of your next movement phase, set it up anywhere in the battlefield that is more than 9 inches horizontally away from all enemy models. In other words, at the end of your opponent's turn, if you're not in melee combat, you can pick up your Terminator, put it in Deep Strike, and then in your reinforcement step, you can put it back down wherever you want to, 9 inches away. Remember, this is in your reinforcement phase, or reinforcement step of your movement phase, which means you can't move them, right? So there's no put 9 inches away, move 5 inches closer, and then a 4-inch charge. No. Bad. That's not how it works. But it's a really good ability nonetheless. And this is actually a good chance for me to talk about the second thing we know about Custodes, which will be that every single unit has at least 2 abilities. They will have one permanent ability for the Allarus, that is the Slayer of Tyrants. And then they will have a one-time ability, so once per battle ability, which is from the Golden Light for the Allarus. But for the other units, we don't really know. For Trajann, it's the Moment Shackle. But I think that's just super flavorful, being like, alright, every other unit in the game basically has an ability. Custodes gets 2. One of them is only once per battle, but it's kind of like, you know, oh yeah, here comes the Golden Heroes and doing their special thing. So I think that's very cool. Yeah, as I mentioned, the Vexilla +1 to your OC, and then a 4-up in Vulnerable Shave. And that covers the Custodes part of the Custodes preview. However, Custodes don't come alone. They bring some Anathema Saikana, or Sisters of Silence. The Sisters of Silence have the exact same profile as before. They are OC2, which means that they are on par with Space Marines for objective control. Their bolt gun is Rapid Fire 1, 24-inch range, 1 attack, ballistic skill 3, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, exact same profile as it was in 9th edition. Their melee is just, you know, them punching with their small hands and like, go away, no. But their abilities, however, oh boy. Now, it is unclear if these abilities are unique to the Prosecutors or are gonna be shared across all the 3 different versions of Sister of Silence infantry, which is the Witch Seekers and the Vigilators. In any case, the Prosecutors for sure have a free up, feel no pain against psychic attacks. Now I'm just gonna, you know, scroll down here, click on the Grey Knights faction preview, scroll down just a little bit more, open up this little image here, and oh, would you look at that? Silencer, Psychic, Psy Cannon, Psychic, Nemesis Force Weapons, Psychic, Gatling Silencer, Psychic, Heavy Psy Cannon, Psychic, Nemesis Greatsword, Psychic, Nemesis Demon Greathammer, Psychic. Hey, all I'm saying is that if we run into Grey Knights and you bring a lot of Sister of Silence, you get to laugh. A lot. You'll still die to Stormbolters, but you'll get to laugh when like, oh yeah, your 5 guys didn't kill my 5 girls in melee because free up, feel no pains, baby. I just think it's wild. I think it's wild. Also, worth mentioning, they get the 4-up against mortals because they have the faction keyword Adeptus Custodes. And if we go to the top, you can see Adeptus Custodes models from your army have the Feel No Pain 4 ability against mortal wounds. And at first I was like, oh yeah, so they have the Adeptus Custodes keyword down here, right? Nope. The only keyword identifying them as Adeptus Custodes is the faction keyword, which should also mean that the Sisters of Silence also have that keyword, meaning they get a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. So they have a 3-up Feel No Pain against psychic abilities, a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. They still only have a 3-up save and 1 wound and toughness 3, so they still die to boulders of all kinds. However, those things that could, you know, just randomly kill them before is kind of like, oh shit, wait, I actually need to specifically put bolt guns into these girls to kill them easily. I just think that's hilarious. I think that's so funny. And I haven't done any kind of math, but are Prosecutors more tanky against mortal wound and psychic attacks than Space Marines? Having T4 and 2 wounds might change the math in the favor of Space Marines, but like, I just thought that was funny to think about. And the other ability they have is Purity of Execution. Each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack that targets a Psyker unit, that attack has the Precision and Devastating Wounds abilities. So that Precision, we don't exactly know what does, but the idea, or like what people think it is that you can target a character inside of a unit. So say a unit of Space Marines being led by a Librarian, you can specifically target the Librarian. And then Devastating Wounds are critical wound rolls, deal mortals instead of normal damage. So yeah, pretty damn solid anti-Psyker. They lost their immunity to psychic powers, which probably is fine. It's a lot more flavorful having them be immune to psychic powers, because that's kind of how it works in the lore as far as I understand. But from a gameplay perspective, I understand why they want to change it to this. And a 3-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks is nothing, like nothing to laugh at. Very solid, very solid. Alright, and we actually have one more look at a weapon profile for the Vigilators, which is the Executioner Greatblade. This has Anti-Psyker 4+ and Devastating Wounds. Anti-Psyker 4+ means that on a roll of a 4 or higher, it counts as being a critical wound. A critical wound being the same as rolling a 6. Devastating Wounds triggers on a critical wound, which means that if you put 5 of these girls into a Psyker, they're gonna take like 4 or 6 mortals on average. The profile itself is 2 attacks, weapon skill 3, strength 5, AP 2, damage 2, which means that this weapon is like marine slaying, but also psychic slaying no matter how big they are, because you have anti-psyker 4+, so you don't really care about having low strength because you just need to roll 4+, and then you trigger it into mortals instead. So yeah, very, very solid profile. They are, however, still Sisters of Silence, which means, you know, toughness 3, 1 wound. So they do still die very easily. Once again, we do not know if these abilities are shared across all the data sheets of Sisters of Silence or they are specific to the Prosecutors. If I had to make a guess, I would say the Daughters of the Abyss rule is the one that is shared across all Sisters of Silence. And then the secondary ability might be different from unit to unit, who knows. Then we get a look at a stratagem called Vigil Unending, and you revive an infantry unit, Custodes unit. Not unit, model, sorry. You revive an Adeptus Custodes infantry unit, and then, oh my god, I cannot word this properly. You choose a unit, and then you revive one model from that unit, excluding character models. So, hey, we have an apothecary on demand, which, wow, did not see that one coming. That is very cool and very, very strong. Imagine, like, let's say 3 Terminators rolling up towards your opponent, and they just put, like, hell of a lot of guns into killing 2 of them, and then you're just like, yeah, I'll put this guy back. Restrictions being you can only do that once per unit. That's still really good though, because if Custodes cost the same as they do now in 9th edition, reviving 1 Terminator will be 60 points, reviving a Sagittarum will be 50 points, reviving a Spear Guard will be 45 points. It's like 250 points worth of models coming back to life if you use it every single battle round. So yeah, that's really, really powerful. Okay, that wraps up my talking about the Adeptus Custodes in 10th edition, or at least their faction preview. I'll definitely talk more about Custodes in 10th edition. They are a solid A on the tier list that I am yet to make. Martial Katah is just super, super valuable because you can use it in a bunch of different circumstances. 4 up against mortals might not be as necessary in 10th edition, but it's good to have. The data sheets we have seen are either a slight improvement or a side grade on anything from 9th edition, and those were pretty solid. So yeah, overall I am very optimistic about the Custodes in 10th edition, pending points, because points is really the biggest killer of Custodes as well as Imperial Knights. If I need to pay 250 points to take Trajann, then all of a sudden he's not as great. But we'll simply have to wait and see. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. If you want to check out the Reddit post I made, I'll post a link in the description below. If you would be so kind to like, comment, and subscribe, I would appreciate it. And hey, I'll see you in the next video, which is going to be the faction focus preview tier list, based purely on what we see in the previews. And so it's going to be very wrong upon release. It'll be very fun to look back and laugh at. Take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.